Okay, so today's session is managing organizational change and transformation with a new executive team. And it's co-led by Devin Lee, who's had a lot of recent experience with this as she's been a part of some acquisitions and other mergers, and is something that is ever present, ever daily in your life. All right, so let me go ahead and just dig in. Devin, I think you're on mute, but maybe we can just start digging into the topic.
Yeah, so for sure. So like I said, I have been a part of an IPO, had some leadership change, merger, acquisitions, being part of an acquiring entity, taking on new teams, having new leaders. And I think I said this a minute ago, but like just saying out loud is kind of exhausting, but I've seen a little bit of everything. And most recently, I'm in that acquisition, leadership change, and org change phase of things. And so as a member of a leadership team in an organization that's changing, I feel like it's not uncommon. Like I read about it or talk to other peers about a CS leader who's changing reporting structure, maybe from like the CEO to a CRO or a CEO. And in that, like the North Star of what the organization is doing is probably going to stay about the same. But you may have to reestablish yourself with someone who may have been more of a peer to you before, or who might not have details about how you or your team works. So it's like setting that foundation all over again sometimes. And then kind of in that company acquisition place, and I mentioned it a minute ago, right? But like moving from that smaller organization into a bigger group. Something I have seen as a part of that, and when I joined early with Jan, was just mentioning like we have had, I've experienced taking on new teams that were part of other acquisition companies or acquisition products within my organization. So not only do I have like a new team, a new organization that I'm figuring out, I've been given new peers, like new people reporting to me who need some guidance. Some of them have had 4 managers in the last year. So there's just been a lot of change, right? So they're still having to have the ability to build trust with me. They have to make sure that they are like doing that rinse repeat story of like, what are the important things to them so that I can keep making sure that I am moving the needle forward for them. And that can be, I don't know, really challenging. And it's one of the things that as I started the conversation with them, was really aware of the fact that they've had a lot of change. And I just can't come in and say, oh, well, I'm going to flip the tables and we're going to do all these other things differently. They've been trying to address that in some way for a while. And I need to make sure I know where they're coming from as well. And then, so.
Well, and that's the other thing too. It's like, when you think about it, who is saying that, put in the chat, have you been in an organization that's been acquired, or where you've acquired, or like all of a sudden just new executives have come in, right? Because like, that's like, yeah, right, Christine, like all of the above, because like it's scary, right? Like, as as soon as new executives are in, or as soon as there's an acquisition, all the change is going to be trickling down, and then it's just change after change after change. Yeah, absolutely. I know, like all these folks over in the side or in the chat are saying that. It's like it's insane. And so, like, how long has this been going on for you, Devin?
So we were acquired, and we I feel like announced the acquisition fairly early, like last summer. So it's been like a while, and it was like a little bit too, depending on how, your organization works, of like when you actually start to integrate with the team, because it's like a little bit of like sitting on the edge of your seat for a long time before you get direction on how things are going to change. And like for me, I had team members who want to know, and they want clarity, like, what's going to change for us? When are we going to do this? I don't have the answers to those questions all the time. Sometimes, like, I think even the executives are still working out some of that as well. We had not only like for this, what I'm talking about now, like acquisition, but we had leadership change too. So those new executives were thinking about, from the board or whoever, like PE, like what do they need to drive as their new KPIs, as their new OKRs, like what's shifting? And then that passes down to everybody else. And I feel like those are the times where like communication can get really blurry. I don't think that a lot of organizations do that type of like executive leadership change well, where, you have somebody new come in and like, there probably will be some changes, but there's that, like I said, like sitting on the edge of your seat, like, well, what is it going to mean? and making sure like there's some clarity around that. Because I think that depending on how those things are handled, right? Like communication gets blurry. I think that you're bringing in potentially new cultures if the exec team's bringing in new
Mhm.
acquisitions. And depending on those two things, people can either really quickly feel included in what's going on, or there can be feel very excluded in kind of how the organization is thinking about something.
When I was in a startup that was part of an acquisition, and there was a PE, a private equity group that was all part of it. And I think it was for 3 years, we just had a hyphenated name, and it was
Yeah.
really clear. And like, and that was the culture. It was
Yep.
hyphenated. You were either Avail or you were TVN. It was
Mhm.
not a new, together company, right? And so like, who, and then it's crazy, like all the alliances and that sort of thing. And do you make friends with the people that are part of the other
Mhm.
company or not? And, are you seen as, like whatever, just all the politics were ridiculous.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, everybody's impacted by like leaders are, the team is, right? There's change across the org. And I think that that's like the thing too, right? Like leaders are trying to make sure that they understand who else that they need to have conversations with, like internally, who else do they align themselves to? Teams are trying to understand like, what do they need to know? What's changing for them? And then like in the organization, like for me right now, there's a lot of faces, right? On a call, I don't know everybody's names, and things have still shifted so far as like some people's scope of work during the time I've been here, where it's like, oh, I used to know that John was the person I was going to go to for that, but they're
Mhm.
away or they're doing some other work right now. So figuring out like that realignment as well.
Yeah.
And it just is interesting. Like Jan, you said this about like the hyphenated piece. Like we had talked about this. So when Jan was sending me the information, we were prepping for this. She was like, but what email address do I use? And I was like, you can send it to one of like probably 14 places and hopefully it'll get to me, because amongst everything else, right? You may have email address changes. You may be presenting your brand to the organization, your clients as something by Medallia or like that bigger brand. And it
Mhm.
can get confusing for the clients too. And so you have to like think about how we message all of that change, like as we're absorbing it and we're trying to figure it out internally for our processes and how we do our work, like making sure it doesn't impact the clients. I mean, that can be really
Right.
challenging because an email like that, 5-year renewal that comes from the wrong email address that gets put in spam, like that's a big issue.
Right. Well, and the other story that I thought was interesting is there were times when you were in meetings with your CSMs and they would ask about some sort of question, and there was no answer because it is still getting worked out. And then how do you deal with that sort of, you know, limbo,
Yeah,
right? It's
I
a
had
lot
that
of
conversation
limbo.
today. Like I feel like I've frequently had that conversation, but I had that conversation today just to say, this is the information I know. I don't have any more. I don't have the answer that you want right now, but this is what I'm going to do to follow up and make sure I'm going to, on Tuesday, check back in. I know that my leader talks to this other person. And after that meeting, I'm going to talk to them to see if I can move it forward. But there are still some things, right, that are out of my control. I want to have those answers for the team, but I can't push them. Like I had something recently and I was like, oh, I'll escalate this and figure out where it is. It was with the CEO. And I really just didn't feel like that was something that I needed to push forward to just get my answer among all the other things that he was working on.
Right. Well, and what about like for your teams that have had so many managers in the year, like what do you do to give them some sort of hope
Yeah.
and some sort of reason to stick around? I guess that would
Yeah.
be, I just want to stop for a second and just kind of really focus on that for a second, because there is so much ambivalence and limbo. How have you been dealing with that?
I try to be as transparent as possible. Like when I first met with them and I had been told like they've had X number of leaders and this is what's been going on with them. Like they've kind of been, they felt like they have not been included, right? So they were on that side of the spectrum. I just said to them, like, this is what I'm hearing. And I also know that you've probably said these things 14 times. Is it possible, or do you have something that you could even forward me that you sent your last manager that shows me the scope of what you're working on? And then I also asked them, like, what are like the 2 things that you want to make sure we get accomplished because you've been asking about them for a long time? What are your, biggest frustrations? And I really wanted to be able to have like some quick wins for the team. Like, how can I help them get some trust in me? Because again, like if I'm number 4 in that long line, they're like, I don't know, she might be gone in 2 months. Like, why do I need to, rely on her? So trying to figure out how, if it's possible to get some wins for things that they have been trying to chase down for a while.
I love that. So you've had a transition of 4 different managers. I'm number 4.
Yeah.
What do you keep repeating yourself about that you need help with and you're not getting that help? I love that.
Yeah, exactly, Christine. Yeah. Like, why should I invest, like even talking to you, like in learning about you, like you could be gone. And it is just crazy. So I've seen this in other ways, but like you could potentially, have another shift. But I think so, like this one, right? So like I was talking to Jan, I had this epiphany when I was walking, but we've all heard the saying, so you can't see the forest for the trees. And so in a time of acquisition or change, it's easy to focus on the trees, but like you've got to focus on what you can control and sometimes close out some of those other elements. So there's so many moving parts sometimes, like you need to focus on the things that you can control. And in my experience, a lot of times you're being told, you need to continue business as usual, like during that acquisition, continue business as usual, but it's not the same. It can be really daunting because the landscape's changing around you, but you just need to continue to do what you do. And I try to think about it for, my organization right now is that like somebody else's trees are making sure like the operational things and making sure that those other items are being taken care of. But my trees and my details are making sure that we retain clients, making sure that we don't have any interruption to service. Like those are the trees. And I don't know, I think that great organizations probably have M&A playbooks that ensure that there's clarity on all of this in the short term, but I just don't think it happens as frequently as it should. And I haven't experienced an organization that's nailed it. Like somebody like a great job, but it's hard to do. It's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I was gonna, were you going here?
Yeah. So just in that forest, right? So like when you are getting to that focus, you have to make the decision of like how you're going to perceive what's on the other side, because, maybe you're, going through the details, you have the big picture, what that forest is. But Jan had shared on that next one, like recently at the beginning of this series, is this, how you might experience that change. And recently I heard something that resonated with me is that the quicker that you can get to that acceptance place, right? The quicker you can get there, or your teams can get there, the clearer your view is going to be. So it is hard, but if you can just say, okay, I am going to like dive into this, but on the other side of it, so like what you're going to see, that's still up to you. So on this next slide.
Well, but what I love about this is that this is the same curve that Britt Andreatta has, and yet this is what you're sharing inside your company, because you're going through so much change that they've even added these great little people things, to animate it, right? But you have that curve, and like when you're doing organizational change or any kind of change, it's emotional. This is what's happening.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And I think, you have to remember that it's emotional, but like, again, like, so what do you see on the other side of that, right? Like you've gotten through and you are at that acceptance place. I have seen like individuals that I've worked with, and I'm sure that in some degrees, I realize that I do this, that are taking your past experience, that are influencing your perception, right? Do you see the guy who looks like he may mug you in the back alley behind 7-Eleven? Or do you see like a beautiful Pantene Pro V model? So you have to think about how you're going to perceive that, right? And I think that having a knowledge of what is your value and what is your worth can like shift your perception. Like I have experienced change, so I think that it doesn't disrupt me. Like the turmoil and the living in ambiguity, those are like past experiences. I've never gotten burned by something like that has been big change. But I think I've had other people on my teams that have gotten burned by significant changes, and they're seeing it a completely different way. So I think it's talking about that, but like the underpinning values of like focusing on those details, but don't forget to like look up and know, right? Like, why are you there? What are you bringing to the table? Because those are going to be really important in the long run.
And just really loved that you found these pictures of the forest and the trees too, because we all have our different experience of being in this forest, right? If we're leaders, if we're CSMs, if we have other types of roles in the organization, you know, the executives, everybody has like this different view. But if we can all try and get here together and look at what we're trying to do together, then we can all, you know, sort of find a way to, you know, get to the other end of the forest together, right?
Mhm.
But that is very challenging. So that's what we thought we would do for the breakout questions. And if you want to post again in the chat, the links so that people have not just the Slack slides and also, of course, the resources, but also for being able to take the notes. Wanted to focus on mindset and kind of what your mindset is when you're handling really big change, and maybe you're dealing with really big organizational change right now or other types of large change. And then also when you're in an organization, what has been your strategy in making certain that when you're working with your executive team, that you have a way of connecting and being able to stay for the long haul and not being on the chopping block too, right? I don't know, what other thoughts did you have about these questions, Devin, when we were setting up for?
Yeah, I think, honestly, like the mindset piece is something that I've thought about, right? Like, I think I used to think about it more frequently. I was at a business that had a lot of acquisitions, and there were also like a lot of risks involved in that. So I was like, okay, what does that mean for me? Like, am I going to live? Because for a while, I think I was like living in a very stressed place because I was waiting for the shoe to drop. I was waiting for somebody to say, this isn't going right. But I was like, I need to focus on like what I'm doing, like the value that I'm bringing, the team that I am like bringing up. And then also understand that if something were to change, that I could be okay. And I also needed to know like how high or low, right, is that bar going to be for me to want to make a leap? Like if I get told I need to start owning part of, a team that I have no experience in, or like 45 more people and absolutely would run me to the ground, like what are those breaking points going to be for me?
Yep. Yeah, really understanding, like, do you need to actually leave the organization, or can you stay? Can you go along with this change? Absolutely.
And knowing that or thinking about that before it's like put on you, I think is really helpful. It gives you a little bit more like peace in the day to day if you've already thought it through, right? Like somebody asked me to do something wildly unethical, like I'm out of here. But what are those points going to be for you?
Yep. Cool. And I know that Trevor and Courtney are already having some conversation over in the chat. Let's go to the breakout rooms. Go ahead and discuss this in the smaller groups, and then bring back some ideas and things that we can share with each other. So make certain you have the links for that. I'm going to open up the rooms. Excellent. How did that go? Looks like there's still a lot of busy note taking from as folks are finishing up. I was noticing over in the chat this last comment from Ellie. Ellie, are you back here from your group? I was noticing that you were mentioning that, let's see, what were you saying? That in terms of like when you get frustrated by all of the change, then that gets read by the new leadership. And then you end up having to like deal with people who don't really know you and having to like explain yourself. And all of a sudden, like, I don't know, I just thought that was like, I felt that. I felt that so much before. I was sort of curious about your experience of that. Ellie, if you wanted to come off mute. Ellie Hutton? No? Okay, well, you're smiling, so we'll go on to the next thing. Anyway, was there some other, it sounds like there might be something with the sound. Were there any, I saw a lot of notes over here. We want to maybe just start from the beginning, group one. Trevor, Mari, Lisa, Pam, Debbie, Felicia, anybody have something they wanted to share?
I really loved Trevor's insight. He was responding to the way that Felicia has been very successful in kind of like getting people on board with change by being more of an active listener from art and asking questions to understand their needs. And Trevor brought in like a really cool parallel to like international development, kind of like don't community and construct without consulting what they need, and then how can you kind of serve that. And I think that Felicia just like made a really good point of the way that she could that she works with school districts to understand that I want to understand what you're doing. And I believe Pam was even saying that she's made a lot, like able to generate a lot of revenue just from being a leader who offers solutions in the face of change. And I'm very impressed because she's offering change to districts and teachers, and we do not, and not like that. We're a tough, like teachers can be a tough, so I have a lot of respect for anybody that can get educators on board, because I was that educator, so I understand.
A lot of change always over in education for sure. Ellie, is your sound working again? Oh, great. Well, what I was asking about, oh no, I can't hear you though. Try talking again.
Okay, how about now?
Oh, now I can hear you. Awesome. So I was commenting on in the chat that the comment you had before we all did breakouts, where you're talking about like the how frustrating change is, and then you have this new leadership that comes in that doesn't know you, and all they see is that frustration. And then it's like, then you're branded as that frustrated person, as opposed to who you've been for the last however many years working in this role. So
Exactly. Yeah,
I didn't know if you wanted to share more about that.
Absolutely. You always have to think about what perception you want somebody to have of you when you walk into the room. Like what do you want to leave behind? What do you want them to say about you when you're not there, right?
Yeah.
And that's not just with new leaders, that's really with anybody. But especially with new leaders who have control over your destiny a little bit, right? So I think if you are feeling frustrated and irritated and you're like, I don't really want to be here anymore, if you're actually ready to not be there anymore, then go make that happen. But if you kind of need a bit of a jumping off point, you need to go in with as much of a positive mindset as you can.
Yeah.
I like the thinking about things like assume positive intent, like, because otherwise, like, you're going to jump in with that like negative mindset. Sometimes that's like helpful for me. Like, surely the way that this was phrased was like, or the way that they're approaching this is not meant to be harmful for my organization, my team, me long term, surely. And then allow there be enough time for a conversation and to figure out. And if it is, maybe it is harmful, but go in assuming that it's not going to be.
Yeah, you have to not take things so personally.
Mm-hmm.
I often take things personally first. I'm like, wait a second. Is that person really being a jerk like to me? No, that's just the way I'm taking it, right? And then it's my choice about how I handle that afterwards.
You know, I think CS people have good intention. No, I know CS people for the most part do, and for the most part, they believe in people. That's why we do it. Engineers, not as much. So it's interesting what personalities are attracted to different jobs. And
I've worked with a lot of engineers who have very good, big, passionate, compassionate hearts. It's just they don't always focus on communicating, or thinking outside of their perspective, which CS always has to think outside.
No, but the other thing is engineers and lawyers, they have to always anticipate what could go wrong.
Oh yeah, that's true. There are some aspects of our roles where we have to constantly be troubleshooting. Yeah. And it's true. I have a friend who's a lawyer. She's always thinking of, I think her most common phrase is to be a devil's advocate.
Yeah. Or what could go wrong. That's what I get.
Right. Group two, what kinds of things were you talking about in your group that you thought we could share here? let's see, Charles, Eric, James, Christine, Lynn. Christine, you always have something to, come on, I can count on
Okay, so
you.
I think that actually Eric's point was one of the ones that he made. It was the structure of the third point in the group 2 notes, right? Been part of a larger company, rotation of VPs and directors, but it's that end statement that I found the most, I think, useful for future. I have to manage up proactively so that when you become a part of this new team structure, one of the first things you need to do is make sure that the new management knows who you are and knows what you do and understands that, so that you can figure out how you're going to fit in and align with those new goals. I think that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Ellie, Joseph, Marianne, Andrew, John. Andrew, first of all, your one-liner over in the chat. Got to say that out loud.
Yeah, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to a competence. People are using that out to get you. They just suck at their jobs. That's okay. I suck at my job too. That's normal.
Well, we can on any day do something that is, maybe not our best, so sometimes that happens.
And also motive and evidence have to be considered, not just motive. Like, oh, they don't like me. They are trying to do this and this and this. And like, okay, sure, but like, back it up. Can you? Probably you.
Well, surprisingly, competent people are very good at managing up. Surprisingly. Be
The
aware.
people are or are not?
Oftentimes people who are incompetent are exceptionally good at managing up.
Oh, yeah.
Or I should say sucking up, I guess.
So,
Yeah,
I had never thought about managing up until I went to business school and then realized that like it was a whole term, a phrase, a thing, is that new to anybody here, or is that something that people have been practicing for a long time here? Anybody want to speak on that?
I think it depends on where you come from. Like,
Mhm.
if you come from specific disciplines or specific modalities in terms of thinking, like it's kind of inherent to certain things. Like for me, I come from a social sciences background. So it's always been, yeah, you need to go talk to people about what they need. You can't just go in there and make it happen without any consideration, if ands or buts about it. I think it honestly depends, because like it's a skill that I've heard from people who are much more senior than I, that not everyone can learn or not everyone can have. So whether it comes from a background that you've already had or you learn it over time, I think it's to a point to where it's almost necessary. Like for instance, like in my org, we're doing a lot of change. There's been like 8 other people that have tried to get the change to happen. And then for whatever reason, I'm the one who's getting it to happen. And it's not so much that they were, unaware of managing up. It's just that they were like, okay, we actually have to now. Like there's a breaking point and it's right now.
Yep. Yep.
I also think at big companies, it's important you really learn fast how to manage up or you fail. Because if you really want to get into nitty gritties with your leaders, they don't have time. So you really need to kind of prepare and figure out ways how you can just say, here are the 3 things I need to know about this project, or here's the 3 things you need to know about this project. And then how do you want me to respond to this? I did this and this. Is this, what do you want to do next? Or whatever it might be. Like you really do, if you want to be effective and then actually eventually go into leadership, I think that you need to learn how to be concise and how to, communicate that. And even with other team members, because you can lead by example that way as well.
Yep. Yep. All right. Group 4, Maximiliana. Did I say your name right? I love that name.
Maximiliana.
Maximiliana. That's a beautiful name. Janet, Kathy, Clifford, and Cynthia. Any thoughts you wanted to share from your breakout group? Key takeaways? Little aha moment.
I'll jump in. I think we had a lot of great comments. Basically, control. It's what repeating sort of what was said. Control what you can control, which is what you do. Also, try to focus on your projects and quantitative results, right? That you can share with leadership, right? If you can quantify what you've done, that's really what anybody in the C-suite really cares about. Also, a couple things I was surprised by, as some people hearing about mergers or potential mergers on the news or that very morning of the merger. Can you imagine? Like, oh, we've been acquired. I mean, that I'm flipping shocked about. And then also too, like, you know, when it happens, regardless of if you're communicated with anticipation or that very day, you know, obviously try to get a grip on yourself and try to keep the emotion out of it. Because I think a very good point was made that you don't want to be perceived as that bitter person. You don't want to start that way. And really, you want to be able to kind of develop those relationships across the company to the new team members. So I thought that was some really great feedback from some of the other people. I'm sure, I don't know if everybody else has anything else to add to that.
No, that's pretty great. Let's just get in the last two groups here, because we're at time. Group 5, Paul, Courtney, Nicole, Ashley, Erica. Did you have some takeaways to share or any aha moments? Something you haven't heard yet today? Thanks, Ellie. Nicole?
I'll hop
Yeah.
in because Courtney just called me out in the chat. I asked, and actually, Devin, this is kind of a question that I have for you, and that we talked about a little bit in our group, was what does it look like when an organization nails that transition? Like what's our criteria? How do we nail it?
No, I think that's a really good one. I actually thought that we talked about that a little when I saw that question pop up in your all's number 5 group, but I think like explaining the why to the change, like explaining the why to any of the leadership. I think it's that communication is like almost like over communicating, but also I think that it's really important, like for acquisition, when you're blending 2 teams together, to put some level of HR effort together of understanding of, you know, like a meet and greet. It's not just like immediately you're going to be able to bond and work with these new peers. If possible, I think like budgets and travel, whatever, like on sites are really great too, because if you're going to be working really closely with people and you need them to go fast, I do think it's easier to do those things and build those relationships in person versus over Zoom. But figuring out a way to get that going quicker and over communicate, I think that, I mean, HR has to play a really big role in it. And there also should, you know, hopefully in part of whatever the acquisition like process was, some consideration to like, does the culture of this business match the culture of that one? And if it doesn't, and if there is intent to just remove, you know, part of the business, like how can an organization, that's a hard one, right? Like, how do you communicate that early enough or do that early enough so it's not disruptive?
Yeah, that's really great points there. Does that resonate, Nicole?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially the idea of like over explaining, over communicating. I really like the mantra of clear is kind. So being direct and saying what it is that you need and explaining why sounds appealing to me. It sounds humane to me. So yeah, that was helpful to hear.
I don't know. I agree with the words like clear is kind. And I also think, to me, in regards to what was said, is that controlling the narrative behind change is so important for the perception of change. And I kind of mentioned that in the group, and I think it's really like kind of tags on to what a lot of people are saying in terms of listening. But if you kind of like don't over explain the need behind the change, people are gonna connect the dots on their own, and they may not connect them in the way that you want them to interpret that change. So if you want them to understand the change from like the lens that you're looking at it, then you should really make every effort to present that change and explain it to people, because a lot of times they're gonna like you're gonna spook the horse. Like it's gonna jump if it otherwise. And if you don't want it to do that, you just like, I mean, you gotta let them know, like they're not gunshots or fireworks.
That's
like,
a great point.
That.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when you think about it, then if you can give that why, if you can give that North Star, then even if that North Star changes, if you've given the why behind it, you can say, hey, this is what's changed. We're going to change the North Star. And at least everybody is together, you know, with that same understanding. That why is really important. Devin, why don't you, with the chat thing you were going to add there, and you were in group 6, we can finish up with you and group 6 and what you just added to the chat.
No, that's perfect. No, I mean, one thing too, Nicole, I think our CEO is doing this right now, and it's really been great, is that he's doing like an ask the CEO. And so he will get emails, he will respond to them each week. And they're like some really pointed questions, some really specific ones. I don't know that everybody's open to that, but it has been really helpful with him being new, and it has made everyone feel that he does have our best interests, or he will be the clear as kind. He will be very clear. He will be very transparent with us. But some things we talked about for like the questions that were presented were that, you know, understanding what level of flexibility you want to have within an organization, but then like what are you going to be able to do to thrive? Like Sean was talking a little bit about some of like his experiences, and that people, right? Like having leadership that can be trusted, having a product that you want to, you know, build, that you want to work for. And then also, having, let's see, the kind of ability to create like a customer experience that drives outcomes that the stakeholders are going to care about. Like those are things that like he was kind of like would hold on to and could thrive in the organization that we were agreeing with. And we kind of bounced around on like the exec team one, but I think it's like just articulating that things are important to, you know, CS. What does it look like for a go-to-market fit? And then also, how do you make sure that, you know, for that new changing team, whether you're the only person who is in CS, like communicating to your exec team, or like in a new team, like how do you communicate like what that mindset of customer success is going to be? And, you know, make sure, like this was mentioned, like make sure that, you know, your peers don't think that customer success is like answering support tickets. Like make sure that you are kind of being loud with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because especially from the CS perspective, when you're going through organizational change, you don't know if the new executive team is going to understand what the purpose of CS is. And there could be a whole nother sort of education process at hand. So yeah, this is great. Great stuff. Any last words that like, wait, you didn't talk about this? I must share this because I want you to feel like you can share. Andrew, you came off mute.
Real fast.
Yeah.
Not to change against the current.
Yeah.
Raise your head up out of the water and look around you, because if you're trying to change counter to something that the CEO or somebody in the C-suite some other way, you were going to work yourself into a tizzy for absolutely no reason, and it was doomed the whole time. So learn before you start changing.
Observe, yeah.
Well, and that's a really good point. And actually next week, we're going to be talking, not next week is 4th of July. It's a holiday, so we will not be meeting, but July 11th, we're going to be coming together and talking about how to work with change among resistors. Now, certainly if you have the leadership of your company trying to go in a direction and you're trying to swim against that current, that might tell you I should just go to another pond where I can swim with the current, right? But also sometimes as an executive leader, you do have to stick around and you have to try and help them understand, hey, by the way, CS is not support or something, right? Or you have a team that was doing support and you have to switch them over to doing, you know, something strategic. And, you know, that's also, you might have resistors in that. So we're going to be talking about, you know, a variety of different ways in which you might be dealing with resistors in change. Paul, you came off mute. Was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna echo what Andrew was saying, or just kind of riff on that, and that is, and Devin mentioned this too about the ask the CEO. Yeah, it may not be for everybody, but don't hesitate to speak up. You know, CEOs are people too, and they're doing this for a reason. They're probably running, you know, crazy trying to, you know, do the right thing for the acquisition that was made or the merger that was made. Speak up and, you know, be polite, persistent, professional, and, you know, they'll typically respond.
Yeah, great advice. Felicia, did you have something?
I was thinking, Jen, because, you know, within our company, we had 2 acquisitions, and I remember in the first meetings a few months back, you know, there's like an expectation that's communicated and it's like a high level perspective. And then finally things start coming in and then there's more communication. And then suddenly things really start looking different from what what was stated was going to happen, because through this experience, you start realizing, oh, we can't really just transition in this team with this team because they're using different systems and protocols, and we don't have data that's clean in order to just kind of switch over. So in that kind of thing, I think when you're sharing the narrative, you also have to have grace that it may not be exactly what's communicated, or it may not be what is hoped for, but the fact that you're taking steps and you're building momentum, and that you're still getting that communication and you're still able to ask questions and move forward, it's helpful,
Yeah.
So I think that as long as there's open communication and there, like Trevor was saying, transparency, I think that you can have success through change, because change really is about, it's going to come no matter what. Change is going to come, but how do we navigate change? And that's with, like, what do I know? What don't I know? And it's that area when we don't know that can make us feel anxious. But the more that we know, the better we're, kind of navigating, riding that wave, and it's good.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I think that we just got to keep asking questions, because I know it may look one way, and maybe Devin,
Right.
you experienced it, and then as things start, showing up, it's like, wait a second, is this really cost effective to have this many people on this team? Is it going to help us, move the needle here if we shift people in this way? So I think there's just a lot of things, and sometimes you don't need to be privy to all that, but you just need to know, like, how does this affect me and what I'm doing, and keep asking the questions. And like I said, extend grace to yourself
Absolutely.
first, and then to others.
Absolutely. Yep. Great point. Great way to close it. And, it's lovely. Thank you, Devin, so much for starting us off today, and participating in one of the breakout groups and leading us through this conversation. I know you've had a lot of experience with this every day, and it was really great to have this topic. Looking forward to seeing everybody in July. We have some actually really great topics coming up around communicating change, CS platforms and change, just a variety of different ways that we haven't actually even covered yet. And so we're going to extend this into July. This is the summer of change, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Have a great holiday for everyone who's in the US, and have a great week off for anybody who's just having a week break from CS office hours. See you in the Slack. All right, take care.
Bye, everyone.